Welcome back to another episode of Building Up Your Business, the podcast. My name is Erica Dill. I am your host with Operationally Up. Remember, we are here to help your e-commerce and consumer business build for scalability and maximum profit. We are joined today by Jeff Krumholz. I'm super excited. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Great to be here.
He's thrilled to be here, as you can tell. We're going to have a wonderful topic. We're talking about to PEO or not PEO. And Jeff is the perfect person to talk about this. He is a U.S. Navy veteran and Pepperdine University business graduate whose career has spanned leadership roles in purchasing, operations, and finance. He's led procurement for global giants like Procter & Gamble and driven operations for a skincare company and even served as a financial advisor. For the past 11 years, Jeff has specialized in HR, payroll, benefits, compliance, and risk management, helping small and mid-sized businesses tackle the challenges of being an employer so they can focus on growth. And the way that he's done that is through a variety of different types, but as you can tell by the title, a big one is PEO. So you've joined the right episode if you want to hear all about it, or you have no idea what it is. So I think Jeff can talk. Jeff, you can talk about this, right?
I think I can add some color. Yeah. Probably.
Okay, well, that's maybe. Yeah. We'll see.
We'll see.
We can judge. We can judge by the end of this if he knows what he's talking about. So let's start us off. Give us a description for those people who maybe haven't heard of a PEO. What is a PEO?
So a PEO is an acronym that a lot of people haven't really ever been exposed to. So PEO stands for Professional Employer Organization. And really what it is, it's just a construct. PEO is a construct that allows two companies to go into a co-employment relationship. And it allows the client company to essentially work with the PEO in a manner that they can lean on on the PEO's EIN for employee tax purposes, shared liability, and ultimately access to their insurances, which is probably one of the biggest drivers.
Well, Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's just the simplest way to probably describe it.
And you're talking about like sharing an EIN and being, sharing responsibility for all these things. The first thing that I know has always come up in my client's mind when I've talked about this is like, oh, are they going to co-own my business? Do I have to give them equity? How does this work? And I'm sure that's a scary thing when you start talking about it. So what do you tell people when they start to get concerns like that?
Yeah, it's interesting. And I would say most of the time, one of the biggest pushbacks we get from a particular company is going to be, I'm going to lose control. Especially from smaller business owners who, when I'm dealing with somebody who, let's say, built a business from nothing and all of a sudden they've got 50 employees or 100 employees, whatever that is. And I always get it's my business. I built it. You're not going to take it away from me. You can't tell me what to do. And we don't. And that's the biggest misconception, is that there is no loss of control. There is no taking over. There is really none of that. We have zero direction and control of the client's company. They run their business how they run it. They hire and fire who they want. They still manufacture the widgets the way they want to. We don't tell them how to sell it. We have zero control over that. There are a handful of PEOs that have very convoluted agreements that can have language in there that can say things like, you need to consult with us before you terminate somebody, or consult with us before you hire somebody. That's more the PEOs that take a staffing approach, less of your traditional PEOs, let's call it. But it's always important for a company, I think, to take a look at that, because that may not be the right partner. But I would say out of the 700 to 900 PEOs that are out there in the market, that's really more the exception than the rule.
Gotcha. Well, and we're going to I want to dig into this in a little bit, but, or maybe we just dig into it now. One of the... Oh, good. Thanks. One of the things that, we talk about with a PEO is that they can help on the HR side and they can be an HR partner. So, when those companies say you need to consult with us before hiring, is it more of like we're here as an advisor and we want to help you with that? Or are they really trying to take control? Or is it both?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I would say that the PEOs that have that kind of language in their agreement are doing it to cover the PEOs backside. So they're not doing it because they want to help you. They're doing it because when you enter into a co-employment relationship, so if you think about kind of how a PEO works in today's world, so if you own a business, Erica's Widgets, and today you decide that you terminate an employee, right? You terminate Johnny. He's a bad guy, said some weird stuff, and you terminate him. And then Johnny turns around and sues you for wrongful termination. That's on you 100% because you're the owner of the business, right? And so if you have an EPLI policy, it's on you and your insurance, basically, right? In a PEO relationship, because you're co-employed, under that same scenario, the client still has 100% direction and control of the business, but when they terminate that employee and they get sued, a smart attorney is going to sue not just the employer, but also the PEO because the PEO becomes the employer of record. And so that's where it gets really kind of confusing. And so the PEOs that have that kind of language in there are trying to protect themselves and say, look, let's make sure you're firing the person the right way before you do it. Most PEOs don't. They have some language in there that might protect the PEO that says if we gave you guidance and you didn't follow it, maybe the PEO will be protected, or if we have to slap your hand more than 3 times or something like that, we'll terminate the agreement. But at that point, it's already a little too late. They're going to get sued, and so is their EPLI policy if they're providing EPLI coverage to the client company. Not all PEOs do that. Smart ones do, but not all of them do.
Well, and I also want to get back to your comment about the employer of record. But there is, a huge benefit with some of these PEOs because they are HR partners. 100%. So if you put aside, the aspect of, them being partially liable, I think that's one of the big benefits to a PEO is that for these smaller companies or these growing companies that may not have that HR partner internally, or they have a more junior HR person, the PEO can really act like a senior HR advisor, and they have a lot more resources and a lot more experience than even hiring, a director of HR.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think what's really important and a misconception with PEOs is that they're only good for small businesses who are in maybe even that circumstance. When the reality is that the need for the HR support from a PEO is dependent on what the company's needs are. So, for example, I've got clients with full, very senior, very tenured HR departments, but they might partner with us because of bandwidth, right? They don't want to hire an additional body, or they need additional resources or something to that effect. Or on the flip side, we'll every once in a while come across a company that is lost an HR person, and maybe they don't want to replace the full body. Maybe they want somebody to wear the hat, but they need somebody, dangerously knowledgeable that knows when to make a phone call and when to call, their phone a friend support, so to speak. And then the PEO can provide that HR guidance and support that they need. So it really depends on the type of service that the client wants to consume, because everybody's a little bit different. And so I think what's really important when looking at PEOs is that being very mindful in the service model and what the needs of the client are, because again, not all PEOs are created equal, just like not all insurance agencies are created equal, or telephone companies or whatever, right? On paper, all PEOs are the same, really, for the most part. All offer some form of HR, some form of payroll, some form of benefits, work comp, risk management, that kind of stuff. The difference is really going to be in kind of how that's delivered, and that HR support is going to really be a big, big piece of it if that's part of the problem that they're trying to solve for.
Well, and to your point, a past project that you and I had kind of worked on was a larger company, but the complexity was that they were in multiple states. And so
Yep.
even though they had some more senior people in HR, knowing all of the compliance laws in all of the
Yeah.
states is very daunting, and so having a very robust team at your PEO that has specialty in all of the states and can, like, at a moment's notice be like, nope, that city has this law and
Yep.
that county has this law and that, territory has this law, like, that's
Yeah.
invaluable.
Yeah, if you think about how most businesses are structured today, unless you're a brick and mortar type business, for the most part, you're employing and or doing business in more than one state. And so having somebody sitting in Los Angeles, for example, but they're employing 50 people, and out of those 50 people, 30 of them are in 30 different states. Kind of hard for that one person to really be knowledgeable in all of the complexities of HR.
Yeah.
And so, and all the nuances, as you mentioned, there's sick time issues, there's all kinds of compliance and training requirements,
By
and it's really
county,
hard.
by state, by
Right,
you name
right. And
it, city.
who wants to be an expert? The reality is that they're not paying somebody to just do that kind of multi-state compliance. And if they are,
Yeah.
they're really not maximizing that person's talents. Most people, if you talk to your average HR person and ask them why they got into HR, none of them said because they wanted to get into processing payroll or dealing with multi-state compliance. All
Right.
of them,
Or time and
all
labor
good-
laws.
yeah, all good HR people, what do they want to do? They want to work on culture building, strategic HR, employee engagement, all that fun, nuanced stuff. But if they're spending 50+% of their time on the transactional parts of HR, then they're really going to run into just, that block and tackle type stuff they're going to have to do on a daily basis. And they're not going to have time to deal with the fun part of HR. They're just going to be dealing with benefit pricing and benefit issues and PTO type issues or leave of absences and all that minutia.
Time clocks and
Yeah, exactly, all those things. And then you factor in all the other states. Now they got to pull in all this garbage and all these things from all these other states, and there's a tremendous amount of liability. I mean, look at all the wage and hour lawsuits that are happening on a regular basis. Not because, look, you're going to have bad employers out there and that are going and should get sued, and rightfully so. But by and large, most of the employers that are getting sued for those kinds of things because they just didn't know, and they didn't have good
Right.
guidance, and they didn't get good information. And so if they're not getting proactive HR, so again, not all PEOs are created equal. If they're not getting proactive HR, they're not getting information as much as they're consuming the information. They're going to end up in a pickle.
yeah. No, and that makes total sense. And I think there's so many topics that I could go down on that road, but we've got so many things to talk about. One of the things I wanted to go back to is you mentioned the term employer of record. And I wanted you to explain a little bit of that so that people understood a little bit more. So if you could elaborate.
Yeah, sure. So employer of record basically is, so in today's business, so if you're not working with the PEO, you are the employer of record, right? You hire and fire those employees, and when you issue the W-2s, the W-2s come from you. Obviously, they're coming from a third party that's processing the W-2s, unless you're physically doing them yourselves, and that would be crazy. But when you partner with the PEO, we become the employer of record. So the W-2s are actually coming from us, the PEO. And so the payroll's coming from us, and so everything kind of has our name on it. So that's where some of the business owners start to get like, oh, wait a minute, I'm not the employer anymore. No, you still are. We're reporting payroll taxes on our EIN, right? So we're processing it. We're doing a consolidated 941 instead of you doing your individual 941 on your EIN. So we become that employer of record. Because of that, the employees become what we call worksite employees. And so, which I'm sure you're probably going to want to get into this, one of those benefits are getting access to large group medical, right? And so, again, in today's world, you think about California, a large group is anything over 100 employees. So if I've got a business and I've got 20 employees and I'm, giving them health insurance, I'm getting them health insurance based on age, zip code, gender, all of these things. And I can't really look and feel like a large employer, like a Procter & Gamble or IBM or whatever. And so as the employer of record, we're able to underwrite all these small groups under our master policy because they're worksite employees on our EIN. That's really what that boils down to. But I'm sure you'll want to get to the benefits at some point, so I'll park that for now.
No, that's perfect because that's my next question. Please go into more about the benefits because I think, especially in this time, as benefit prices keep getting higher and higher and higher, and the benefits keep, what?
It's insane what's going on right now with the type of increases we're seeing right now from clients. I'm seeing things on average, 20% medical increases. I mean,
It's
who can afford
ridiculous.
that, right? Yeah, I've
No.
gotten some that are 40%. So
That's horrible.
it's painful. It's very painful for the employer and the employee.
Well, and they're trying to retain and recruit top talent. And if you're a small company and you've got 10, 15 employees, you can't afford to pay 50%, much less 100%, which a lot of companies are attempting to do right now.
Right.
So I would love to dive into the benefits aspect, but I'd also like for you to jump into some of the other benefits of PEOs as well. So we can start with the benefits.
Yeah, so let's get the benefits monkey off our back. So I'd say about 50% or maybe even more of the clients that we typically work with are coming to us. The main pain point is going to be health insurance. And so again, the reason why a PEO makes sense on the health insurance side is because a small company can access large group medical, so composite rates, right? So you and I, being obviously two different genders, can actually get access to the same plan at the same exact price. And so it normalized, just like if we worked for a large corporation that had thousands of people, when you go to enroll in benefits, you just see a plan and a price, right? And it's the same plan, the same price that everybody else gets access to. But when you're under 100 employees, you don't get that. It's all small group. And so the plans tend to be a little less rich, meaning they don't work as efficiently as large group ones, meaning the copays tend to be more, the deductibles, the networks, things like that. And so when you're dealing in the PEO, we have the ability to underwrite each group under our master policy. And so we have so in California, for example, if we have an Anthem plan that covers all our California-based clients with thousands and thousands of people on it, arguably my plans and rates will be better than what a 20, 30, 50 employee company can get access to. And so in a lot of cases, we're able to save clients significant amount of money. I mean, as an example, I'm working with a client that has 37, I think, employees. And because they're on this legacy type plan and they got a 20% increase on their insurance recently, and this is one of the groups that pays 100% of everything for their employees. So you can imagine it's a very, very big number for them. We're saving them close to six figures on their health insurance by moving them from the open market to a large group. That's not always the case. Every once in a while, you come across a group where open market rates tend to be more favorable because it is demographic dependent sometimes and they are underwritten. Sure. So all that aside, the idea is that you're able to insulate yourself from as a business from the open market, where your PEO plans typically, not always, will see smaller increases than the open market small group plans. And so you're able to kind of join the party, so to speak, and be able to kind of latch on to the PEO's master plans and be able to get the benefit of that. Again, you'll hear me say this a lot. Not all PEOs are created equal. Some historically have bought business, underpriced their book of business, and tried to essentially reel in clients. And then so some of the negative responses you may get from clients that are talking about PEOs, they might say, well, I got great rates, and then after a year or two, all of a sudden I got a 40% increase or something ridiculous. That's an indication of them buying the business and underpricing their book. And so, interestingly enough, I've seen a lot of that this year. The average increase I've seen from some of the other players in the market have been between 20 and 40% on the increases. So,
wow.
And I don't like that. For the main point is they're making the market look bad. They're making the industry look bad. And so my biggest competitor has never been another PEO. It's always been change and the fear of what they don't know. And so, when somebody's had a bad experience, it makes the whole industry look bad. And so I'm not really a fan of that.
can understand that. What other, so other than benefits, what other other than benefits, what other benefits come with a PEO?
All kinds of stuff. So if you think about what a PEO does for clients, let's break that down for a minute. I mean, so a PEO, what do they do for a client? They process payroll. So most clients are outsourcing their payroll to a third party, whether it's an ADP or Paychex or Paylocity, Paycom, Paycor. I mean, you can name a million of them, right?
A million of them.
And payroll is a commodity, but it's the engine that drives the ship, so to speak. So there's the payroll piece that companies are doing. Then there's the health insurances we talked about that they have access to. There's also a master workers' comp policy that acts similar to the health insurance piece. Then there's all the HR support that the client can get, both proactive and reactive HR support. And then there's support around risk management. And then there's other nuances. Let's just kind of focus on those kind of 5 key areas. And so if you think about a normal business that's got employees, they're doing those things already in some capacity. They may not
Or
be
hopefully they're doing those in some capacity.
Hopefully. Some of them are band-aiding it. Some of them are doing it in 10 different ways, or using multiple systems and multiple resources, because there's the technology side of what a PEO delivers. And then there's also the people and insurance side. So there's really 3 buckets that clients work with a PEO. And I narrow it down to, there's the people stuff, there's the insurance stuff, and there's the technology stuff. That's really the core of what a PEO kind of delivers. And so the technology is a bit of the commodity piece, right, that everybody's kind of doing. That's the processing the payroll, the onboarding the employees, and all those things. Some do it better than others. There's nuances and things like that in the systems. And if it's a big deal or not, it's going to be dependent on the client's needs. But then there's the insurance stuff, which we talked about briefly, right? The benefits and the workers' comp and the ancillaries, dental, vision, all of that stuff as well. So again, full package. There's also the 401k piece, which kind of falls into the benefits. And then there's really the HR, and that's really, for me, where the rubber meets the road, I think. And so what a PEO can do better for a client is give them a better mousetrap. Put all that stuff together under one umbrella and give them essentially a bigger bang for their buck. Because again, they're already doing it. So Why not do it better? Why not get more for less sometimes? Sometimes a PEO can be an investment. But then you have to ultimately look at, well, is that investment working? It's like with your manufacturing clients. Is that piece of equipment worth it? I'm spending $1 million on that piece of equipment. What's my return on that investment over, the first year, 3 years, 5 years, or whatever, right? And so it's the same thing with a PEO. If I'm an investment in year 1, but what's the return long term? Do I need to hire a body? Do I need to spend $100,000 on the salary, benefits, payroll, taxes, all those things for that one person? Or can I get away with a lesser expensive option by potentially bringing in a PEO to kind of help offset some of those things? So I think really the biggest thing is giving them a better system and a better process for what they're already doing. Hopefully.
Well, and I can imagine that, especially for maybe lower middle market sized companies, that the owner is probably spending a lot more energy on some of these things than they really should be, or that they need to be doing. So by bringing in a PEO, you can really free up the founder or the CEO to focus on the growth of the company. Absolutely. As opposed to risk management and HR headaches and payroll and all these things that is not the best use of the founder or the CEO's time.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, what do you want to do? You want to let the company do what they got into business to do, right? Yeah. Somebody didn't invent a widget making company so they could get into the HR business. But unfortunately, when you hire people, whether it's 1 employee or 1,000 employees, you have an employee problem. And so you have to deal with all the stuff that comes along with having employees. And so you can either choose to outsource some of it, or you can choose to do it yourself. When you do it yourself, you're going to take away from something. Right now, as you and I are speaking, I'm not doing something else, right? You're not doing something else.
Lost
whether
opportunity.
It's working with the client or business development or whatever. And so if we can give a company back 10%, 20%, whatever the number is of their time back, then there's a hard cost to that. There's soft costs, obviously, but there's also definitely hard costs that go with all of that. And so I think doing an, you know, whenever I engage with a new prospective client, I get very, in my brain, I'm very repetitive. So for me, like, I'm hearing myself say the same thing over and over and over again. But what I always try to do is explain to them that when we get engaged in a conversation, I want to separate the engagement into basically two simple buckets: partnership and price. Is a PEO the right partner for you? Are we the right partner for you? Maybe non-PEO is the right way for you to go, which I know we're probably going to go down that road here shortly. And
We
so,
are. You're so good at segues. I love it.
you know, it's my brain. We're just on the same wavelength.
Yeah,
And
we are.
the other side is price. We can't ignore that there's a cost to doing all of that stuff. Is it an investment? Is it cost neutral? Is it a savings? Does it make financial sense? That we have to figure out. So what I try to do is eliminate the cost piece from the conversation, meaning let's get to it, let's understand what the costs are, but let's focus on, is a PEO or non-PEO, whatever, the right partner for them. And I think if we look at it from that perspective, then the business can make a smarter choice. I think what's really important to also recognize, and because it's something you mentioned before, the size of the company is not just small to mid-size, right? So I've got clients that have 1,000 employees. I've got clients that have 5 employees. So it really boils down to what square peg are they trying to stick in which round hole, and what are they trying to solve for. Once we figure that out, then we can kind of determine, again, goes back to the partnership piece. Is a PEO the right partner? Is a payroll company the right partner? Is an ASO the right partner? And so that's really what we need to figure out. And cost sometimes will help drive that decision too, because it just depends.
And seriously, why am I even here? You're just putting all the segues together. I don't even have to do my job interviewing. But actually, the past project that you and I worked on, we evaluated a PEO and ultimately went with another option. So what are those times when a PEO is not good for a company?
When they're not smart, no.
Oh, gee, well, gee, thanks. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. And so there's an acronym out there called ASO, so Administrative Services Only. I equate that to Coke Zero, right? So it's all the great stuff of Coke missing a few key components. So people like the sugar, the caffeine, but they can't drink it because they're allergic or whatever, diabetic, and they can't drink. So sometimes when we start doing the evaluation with the company, every once in a while, for example, maybe they have a self-funded insurance plan, so they really don't, and they've got very good insurance. They don't need large group. They're already in large group. So the health insurance piece doesn't necessarily make sense. Or maybe they're part of a large organization and they're getting access to benefits through an association or something to that effect. And so when the insurance piece doesn't make sense and the workers' comp, let's say, doesn't make sense, maybe on top of that, they're a risky business. They're knife throwers. At the time, I think you and I were working together, a lot of cannabis companies couldn't get on workers' comp
Right.
or get access to any insurance. And so depending on how the company is structured and what their needs are, if they don't need any insurance or any co-employment tie-in, but they still need obviously to outsource their payroll because they're paying 50, 100, whatever people. So they're outsourcing it anyway, or they're not outsourcing it and they know they need to. And they still need some assistance in HR. So a lot of times they can be put into kind of an ASO type relationship where they essentially can get all the payroll stuff, all the technology stuff they need, and all the people stuff they need. They just don't need any of the insurance stuff. And so sometimes they can go down that road, and that can be cheaper. Not always, but sometimes it can be less expensive or less of a cost. Probably a better way to describe it, because the big misconception out there is that POs are expensive. Some are, but they're not all. Again, you have to do an ROI. You got to run the numbers.
Sure.
And you got to, if you're not running the numbers, you're doing yourself a disservice and you're just assuming that something's expensive. We can all assume that Nordstrom's is an expensive department store. However, I buy a lot of stuff at Nordstrom's and because I can find deals there. There's still deals on the racks there, right? There's still,
Or
shoes
quality.
there.
Maybe you
Or
don't have to
quality.
replace it as often, or
Exactly. And so you've got to factor in kind of the whole thing. And so sometimes non-PEO makes sense. Some clients come on board as an ASO client and ultimately will transition to a PEO because maybe they're gonna have some issues on their medical side, so they're gonna want that, or they're gonna want access to the co-employment because they're realizing that they have a lot of turnover. So sometimes in blue or gray collar type spaces where you've got a lot of transition of employees, a lot of turnover, PEOs can be a great resource because you kind of need that big brother, so to speak. You kind of need that partner to be able to help absorb some of the risk and to also provide them a lot of support and a lot of trainings and things like that. And so ASO can do that as well. It just depends. And some companies they just need payroll help. They just want to outsource payroll. And so not all PEOs can do all three. Selfishly, we can. But so I personally approach every single engagement from why are we talking? What do we need? And then we start building a program around what they're doing. So essentially, instead of kind of putting every company in a box, we kind of build the box around the person, around the company, to decide what it is they needed. So in the case that when you and I worked together, there was a combination of things. They didn't want a PEO. If I remember correctly, the owner kind of had this block in their brain and didn't want a PEO,
Yeah.
and so, but recognized that still needed help in all the other stuff. And so that's where that came in. They're still a client all the years later, right? And they're still an ASO client. We explored PEO a couple of times with them, but the owner still has a block on it and doesn't want to do it. And so in their case, we're still giving them all the look and feel of a PEO up into there's a line in the sand. So that line is the co-employment piece. So at some point, if and when that employer gets sued, there's really not much we can do. We can share all the documentation, everything that we've done, and help them with on the back end, but we can't go to the table with them.
Well, and I think that's a perfect example of where, if there is that mental block on the co-ownership, and that is something that, people are worried about.
Not co-ownership.
Co-employment. Thank you. Thank you for correcting me. That if there is that mental block, then, there are other options that you can go down and explore. And the other thing that you mentioned that I think is really good to know, or really good to keep in mind, is the doing the numbers aspect. Because when I have helped companies evaluate ASO and PEOs and everything, there are so many, especially with a PEO, there are so many costs that get offset in that by switching over to a PEO or an ASO, that you really have to sit down and look at all the numbers and see what financially makes sense and where there is savings and where there is costs. It's not just a simple like one-to-one number. There's like a bunch of different numbers that go into that. And so I'm glad that we touched on that.
Yeah.
So, go for it.
No, yeah, sorry. I think what's going to be really important, again, we may be on the same wavelength in getting to this, but I think what's really important is, evaluating that PEO, and because some clients and some people that might be watching this might say, "Oh, I'm already with the PEO, so that's great. I guess I'm doing the right thing or whatever," but maybe might not be realizing that they are in a non-efficient PEO or in a very expensive PEO because they're not understanding how they're built. Not all PEOs are created equal from a financial perspective. Some bury numbers. So some of the arguments against working with a PEO are, I don't know what I'm paying. I worked with XYZ PEO in the past, and I don't understand what I'm being charged for. And so I left because I wanted more transparency. And so I think it's really important when they're evaluating to really understand where the numbers are coming from. So doing that ROI, even in an existing PEO relationship, is going to be really important because there are a lot of potentially hidden costs in taxes. For example, SUTA is a big play. A lot of PEOs will charge one rate, and the client's got a second rate. So maybe there's a PEO out there in the market that charges, let's say, 6% in California for SUTA. But if the client's actual SUTA rate's only 3%, but the client's being charged 6% by the PEO, the PEOs in California, they have the choice to report on the client's rate or the PEO's rate. So they're going to report on the client's rate at 3%. They're going to keep that 3% difference. It's called SUTA arbitrage. Totally legal, totally okay, but that can translate to thousands and thousands of dollars that the client is left on the table that the PEO gets to absorb on top of maybe some other fees that are already being charged. So where one thing might look cheaper, so I've been in scenarios where the medical rates have looked fantastic from another PEO, But if you do an ROI at the bottom line number, they could be spending substantially more with that PEO because there's maybe 6 or 7 different buckets that they weren't aware of that they're being charged for. And so it's really important to understand where their fees are being, which fees and where they're being charged and from what. Otherwise, they could be completely blind as to what they're paying, thinking that the insurance rates are great.
Right. Well, and as with many things, it always comes down to the numbers. And if you've listened to this podcast before, we're all about the data. As usual, go back to the numbers. And I'd like to wrap this up with kind of the same thing I always like to wrap up. If you have to give our listeners and founders and CEOs 1 or 2 things that they need to think about when they're evaluating PEOs, what are you going to tell them to look at?
Well, you definitely want to, I think, when they're evaluating the PEOs, run the numbers and look at maybe all the different aspects. Look at SUTA, look at work comp, look at medical, look at payroll processing, look at all the fees. What are they burying stuff, or are they just wrapping things up in a percentage? So I think from a financial perspective, they really need to understand what they're going to be billed for and how they're going to be billed. Some presentations I've seen from other PEOs can still bury stuff in the presentation, make it look like it's transparent, but it's not after they become clients. And so they need to ask the right questions about the billing and the charges and taxes and things like that. The other thing I think it's important is to understand if the difference between a publicly traded and privately held PEO. There's some nuances and differences. There are hundreds and hundreds of PEOs nationwide. Many of them are privately held. The ones that are privately held, ask them, are they ESAC accredited? Are they certified by the IRS? If they don't at least have those 2 things at a bare minimum, I probably would reconsider looking at other players. ESAC essentially is, did the PEO do the work and open up their books to a third party and put a surety bonds in place to protect the client and their taxes? So if you think about it, the client's accounts are being swept for payroll, taxes, and benefits and all these things. They're putting a lot of trust into the PEO. They want to make sure the PEO is financially stable. Privately held PEOs don't need to share their financials. So do they have SOC 2 compliance? Ask them for their security protocols and things like that. So your smaller, cheaper isn't always better. Your smaller, cheaper type PEOs may not be safe, especially nowadays with all the cyber stuff that's going on and all the theft of data and all that. You want to make sure that the PEO is secure.
Yeah. Well, and that makes sense. And that's really good advice, because I think a lot of people aren't thinking about that or even knows that those types of securities and compliances exist for them to ask for.
And the PEO should make them available. They don't hide that stuff. If somebody asks me for it, we give them access. We don't publish all our things online, but if a client asks me for our financial securities or technology security information, we give them access to it.
That's great.
They should.
As they should, absolutely. Well, Jeff, it's been wonderful because you've done most of my job in leading up to the questions for me. So I just took a nap for the last 30 minutes. Thank you for that. And this has been another great episode. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It was really a lot of fun.
It is. It's always fun when we get together.
Absolutely.
My name is Erica Dill with Operationally Up. I have been your host. Remember, from bombs to order fulfillment, marketing to taxes, learn the stuff from the pros before you step in it. We will be back here in 2 weeks with another great episode and another great pro. So until then, have a wonderful week, and we'll catch you soon. Bye.